gotta do. Hey, 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 I'm making a move.
Well, welcome to the second episode of Integrating with Automation. I'm Dave Chakmakjian of the Miller Research Group. I'm an executive recruiter in the industrial automation space. And partly one of the things I like to do is keep afloat and keep a deep knowledge of current companies in the automation space, but also ones that are trying to break and disrupt in the automation space, trying to make things easier for people, disrupt and continue to grow in the evolution of automation. And with my searches, I ran into Adam and Matt of Copia Automation. Right now, we actually have the CEO and co-founder, Adam Gluck of Copia Automation, and wanted to give him a chance to not only introduce himself, his story, but talk a little bit about the company, how they're growing, and really what they intend to do with the future of their software and how it's going to integrate many different solutions and fix many different issues within the automation world. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Adam here and kind of give us your story. How'd you get started and how'd you start the company?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, my name is Adam, CEO and founder. I always feel weird using that phraseology right now, especially in an early stage company. It often feels a little pretentious to me, but technically my title is CEO and founder. I focus a lot on the engineering and product side of things at Copia. So that's a lot of my focus. Matt, who you mentioned, is a little bit more on the business side. Obviously, I look into all of that stuff as well. So it's not like I'm totally separate from that, but I'm much more on the product engineering side. My background, which kind of informs how I got involved in Copia, was originally as a software engineer. Copia kind of came about, I'd say, as a result of three different trends for me that were kind of prevalent. So, the first is I grew up in Michigan, so I think the kind of specter of manufacturing industrials really is there. A lot of my family was in manufacturing as well, so kind of that broad base of, hey, I know a lot of people are in the space who have been working in this and thinking through and hearing some of the problems that they're coming across. The second piece that was really tied in this is I'm kind of a Trekkie, so that idea of like a post-scarcity, fully automated society has always had quite a lot of appeal for me. So that idea of, how do we build software systems, how we build, engineered systems that are kind of fully automating things in our industrial base that are enabling us to produce goods much more cheaply, thus making us have a higher standard of living is really compelling to me. And the third thing, which is kind of in the name, is Copia is actually the Latin word for abundance. And so the idea of, hey, can we produce goods more cheaply? Can we produce the core goods that we need in our society more easily was really compelling to me. So I kind of had this idea of, how do you build code that is actually moving things in the real world? I started off at Uber. So I was a software engineer over at Uber. There I worked on the driver team. So basically the team that built the application that drivers use. We spent a lot of time scaling out that platform. So we really grew it from, when I joined, there's 4 engineers on the team to 200 engineers, 100,000 drivers per month to 4 million over 3.5 years. So that sort of growth in terms of the core software platform is pretty insane. So just figuring out how to architect the platform, but also build out the right kind of developer processes to ensure that we weren't taking down the application, which obviously a lot of people relied upon for their livelihood was super important. And then from there, I started working on engineering strategy. So I was really focused on, these big projects tied to kind of Uber's overall microservice architecture, our platforms, how we made changes across the organization, that sort of thing, internal migrations, all of that. So I kind of have a broad base in different sort of software from, mobile, deploying code to millions of people to how huge systems were put together. And the way that kind of Copia came about was, in the background, I kind of never lost this interest in robotics and manufacturing and automation. The reason I actually was in Uber was very much, we used to call it I think it was bits and atoms. So it was, you're writing code, but you're moving cars in the real world, Sure. So me, it's that kind of core productivity piece. Well, even more of that is industrials and manufacturing. So I was looking at different concepts in manufacturing. I had this kind of concept for a front end for manufacturing. Can you upload a CAD file and source all the components that you need? I had another thing where I was like, well, can we build a manufacturing site, maybe something that had been outsourced or whatever, and rebuild it and highly automate it and bring that back. And then I kind of stumbled across PLCs as a technology. And for me, that became really compelling because I was like, hey, wow, first of all, as a platform engineer, I've been working on kind of broad systems. I've been working on the core platform of the driver application. So PLCs, to me, when you start looking at the architecture of an industrial site from a data acquisition perspective, but also from a command and control perspective, is really the central technology.
Sure.
And then there was kind of this piece to me where I'm like, hey, this feels like maybe there's a gap here where, we have all this process we put in place in order to safely deploy code. If it's like just a mobile app that fails in the, software engineering world, but when you deploy code in manufacturing sites, a lot of that process is either manual or the tools just aren't there for people to do certain things. So what that ended up looking like, and I can get into the solution more that we're working on is really, a modern source control solution that's using Git, that's enabling merging, collaborative workflows, really tracing what's happening. But also, as we look ahead a little bit, that sort of automated testing, deployment models, and then also integration with all the great work that's been done around Industry 4.0 and data acquisition and all of that stuff, so that, as you deploy your code changes, you can also kind of understand what's happening there. So that's kind of the overall direction that we're going in, and then we're starting with that source control piece, which I can talk about more later.
Yeah, I love it. No, it's great. It's great that you're able to kind of shift from one thing to another, how they were, it takes one thing to know how something's related, but it's another thing to look at how something's related and how you can apply it to change it. And I think that's really cool what you did. And they said I think that manufacturing side you grew up with, like in Detroit, right? You think of all the automotive plants, right, that are around there, and they all use different types of assembly lines and different toolings and robotics, right? FANUC, KUKA, et cetera, kind of stayed in your DNA, right? From the software side to the hardware side. I think it was just really nice too. And on your page on LinkedIn, they have a really good kind of synopsis. It says Copia Automation is rethinking the industrial market from the ground up by prioritizing the command and control layer and developer tools that power automation in almost every single industrial vertical. That's big. That's a big promise, right? Or a big goal to hit. As you're developing these particular models here, what was your first step then in saying, okay, I have this concept, right? How am I going to start deploying this?
Yeah, and I'd say even before I asked the question of how am I going to start deploying this, I said my brain generated an idea that's interesting. Like let's talk to some people who are actually in the space, And so basically, when I came across PLCs, I bought, a bunch of textbooks on it, like really did very deep research on like how PLCs worked as a technology. Sure. I technically de-risked the concept. So I was like, well, what do people have available if you look at
logic, et cetera, right?
Yeah, these different platforms. What could I actually even build the thing that I want to build? And once I was like, yes, I could build it on the platforms as they exist. They're open enough that I could do this. And a lot of things, like for example, if you look at, Rockwell as a platform, like 2018 is when they deprecated, I think, Slick 5. I could be wrong on that. I think it was 2018.
About that time, yeah.
Deprecate it. So if you needed Studio 5000, which, a lot of our technologies depend on Studio 5000 being there, you wouldn't have even been able to assume that you could build something like this. Ago. That's kind of the recency of this, or you look at, some of the other platforms that have moved towards like an open XML format or openness API for Siemens, which we rely on for a lot of these things. So I technically de-risked it, and then I went and talked to a bunch of people. So I connected through some people at Michigan. People have been automotive suppliers actually. Sure. And talked to them. I said, hey, does this make sense? I talked to people in the Bay Area. And a lot of these people that I talked to back then, we're still talking to. We have bi-weekly meetings. That we still meet with them. So it's been years now that I've talked to the same people and had those sorts of connections that run into the product at this point because we've been talking to them for so long. So. And basically of the first set of people I talked to, what I kept saying is as I got closer and closer to the space, it was more and more acute, the pain point. So if I went and talked to someone, that I happen to know who is a software engineer, they might say, oh, that sounds like a good idea. But as I got closer and closer to the space, people were like, yes, that's very necessary.
Right.
And the thing that was also very prevalent is these things that exist in IT, these like DevOps practices. I was like, well, am I just this pretentious person from Uber coming in, like, this is how we should do this. And then everyone's gonna be like, screw you, we have these great processes in place. And what we found out when I started talking to people is they're like, yeah, we actually know about these best practices. And we and some people had already adopted Git and they'd adopted some of these solutions already in the space where they're like, but the tooling isn't there. So that's where the gap became really apparent. And it wasn't just like something I made up in my head. It was like, oh, there's already these people who are saying that there's this gap and need here. And that's kind of carried the company. So for me, the most important thing was first that initial
verifying
connection.
The validity and the urgency and the need for it, right?
Yeah. And this kind of ethos is still on our website. We say like, you're the experts, we bring the tools.
Nice.
And that's the reality is like, we're building a software product for the industrial space. And if you're going to do that, you have to be very collaborative, right? Like we're not controls engineers. We have some people who are ex-controls engineers, and we have advisors and people who have stake in the company who are controls engineers. So it's not like, there's no one who's involved with us, but a lot of the core team came out of the software world,
I was talking with Matt about obviously how it kind of they shifted themselves from almost one industry to another for this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we do have that, but also the just talking to customers, talking to controls engineers every day, and just making that part of the DNA is really good. And I think for us from a product development perspective, it's also really nice because it's like we came in kind of with beginner's mind. Who are we? We're just going to talk to people, and you might talk to a controls engineer in oil and gas, and controls engineer in automotive, and a controls engineer in electronics, and they might all have different understandings of how the best practices work, what their processes are, and that sort of thing.
Standards,
yeah. So us coming into the space almost as an outsider initially, and now we obviously have a lot of insiders and talk to a lot of people, was nice because we actually got to see that broad scope without any kind of preconceptions.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think that's the best way to do it, right? If you're coming from that world, you have a lot of inside information, but I think you kind of just assume that these are the way things are probably going to be, or we have to adapt with what we have. You guys came from a perspective where you thought you could do something, right? You start talking to people, you start changing their minds, but the need was already there. You just had to verify it, and I think then you started getting their heads from a different perspective, and people are saying, yeah, well, if we could do that, that'd be great. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, we can do that, and let's figure it out. I mean, I think that it takes someone from the outside who has, the contacts on the inside to be able to put those two things together like a Lego piece. These things fit, but you got to make sure you're building the right thing, right? You got to have a kind of a schematic of where you want to take it. For you guys, I was looking at, some questions to ask here, and I think you went over this before too. What do you think is the biggest next part, the next phase that'll continue on this initial success? We talked about, and not getting into too much detail, but, starting to hire. Talked about, obviously maybe some funding coming in, things like that. But if you could give like a step-by-step process of what you think you need to accomplish, let's say the next 365 days, do you kind of have that laid out, and you think you know what steps to take?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say about a startup, is like any sort of future planning is all made up. And this is actually something I like increasingly.
You should tell everybody that, by the way, everybody listening, that it's made up. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, well, it's very easy. I mean, if you're in a company that's a 20-year-old company, 50-year-old company, 100-year-old company, you have a huge amount of data about what the company has done in the past. The metrics and what's normal and what's not normal, and how you're growing. It's all been modeled out in a really nice way. If you're a startup like us that's been around I started working on this as a project 2 years ago.
Right, passion project.
June 22nd was our 1-year anniversary of being actually incorporated.
Oh, wow. Well, 7 days ago.
Yeah, 7 days ago.
Congratulations.
7 days ago. Thank you. So if you look at that, I think like a year ago today, I hadn't even quit my full-time job yet working on it. So, but we've moved very fast, but like the reality is like, you don't know like what the future will hold. So, I talked to one founder and he's like, I can't think more than 3 months in advance, and then obviously, you put together projections and revenue and whatever from all this stuff, from the data that you have. But the reality is you just have to be moving really, really fast. So for us, I'd say the number one thing is being responsive to the market and being able to say, hey, when we talk to customers and they want different features, we can move quickly to build that out. But the other challenge that you run into with that is like you end up going in two directions, because you could be like, oh, someone said this, let's just do it all. So you need some direction there. So for us, I think really what we're super hyper laser focused on right now is building a best in class source control solution built on top of Git. And so really what that looks like is supporting complete Git functionality, which is like, and Git is really the standard software engineering. It's been around for 15 years. Millions of people use it. It's a very standard workflow for a lot of people. And so we just want to bring that into this space. And then also make it work for controls. And so, as always, that's been building a render layer, also a diffing layer as well. So we can actually show visual differential and understand how your code has changed over time, and then bringing all of that to the space. And then a big piece of that is supporting different vendors. So, you come into the space and you're like, well, we're going to support Rockwell initially, but then
Siemens, you have Allen Bradley, right? Right.
And I can list them out. There's,
B&R
and
back off,
Yeah,
the whole gamut, man. Yeah.
All the greats, you get Schneider there too, Omron, Mitsubishi,
Escala, it goes on and on and on.
Yeah, yeah. And then all of them have also different feature sets. So we have a huge document with like all the different features of all the different vendors with check marks or X's on it. And we're just trying to fill the boxes almost, oh, do we support structured text? Do we support syntax highlighting? Do we support commenting? You want to build that really deep, but also broad support. So we're investing a lot of resources right now and hoping to make it so that people can come into the platform and be like, wow, okay, like this really has everything. And I think that's also, when you look at this space, what really mature platforms have. So if you look at Ignition, which we already talked about, is solving a different problem from us. They have integrations for every vendor. They have packages that you can get for all of them, and you just need to do that because it's a half-baked solution. So when we like see people churning out of the product ever, typically they'll say, we love it. It's a great UI. We like what it's doing. But you're missing, you're missing Schneider right now. So we need you to have Schneider support, and because we have, 20% of our machines are Schneider, and without that, it just feels incomplete. So the completeness of the solution is really tied to source control. And that's really what we're tied to. Another piece of this is like just bringing complete Git-based support for that. So like making sure all those Git features work with all those platforms as well. On top of that, just building like a delightful user experience. So we want to build like a hyper modern, UI. So part of that is like, hey, we do support on-prem for enterprise customers, but also having cloud-based solutions. You don't have to host, the files yourself, making it so it's browser-based. You have this beautiful desktop application that's really slick and just runs really nicely, is easy to download, works on whatever platform, bringing all of that to the space where it's like, oh, I can just go in the browser and see my files, is like actually doesn't exist really, so making it so you can go look at everything in the browser and know what you're doing. That's amazing. And it's been really great. So, and then you link sharing and collaboration and all that stuff and code review and things like that. So
you've got a timeline, you have your little notches. It's just, I think probably the hardest part you said before is doing all the things you expect while keeping your ear to the market. You can never get too far ahead of yourself because you mentioned evolution at the beginning of the conversation when you guys started talking, and the world of automation is consistently and constantly evolving. I mean, we see it every single day. A lot of joint ventures coming together and coming with something, Phoenix Contact, things like that, people coming together and kind of changing the game. And I think for you guys, it's important to set your own timelines, right? But also, if something drastically changes, you need to be prepared for it. And how do we do that? How do we remain flexible, right? While also keeping a standard of practice here. I think that's probably sounds like what you're talking about is maybe the most difficult and exciting part of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And if you look at like the set of opportunity available, especially in this like context of the white space that we want to build in, there's a ton of opportunity to build really amazing tools. I talk to engineers every day and I'm like, I would love to build this feature that I know would solve your problem. And I just can't right now, and you really want to. It's like focus is such a challenge in these environments.
Oh, I bet.
There's so much cool stuff to be built, and there's so much really to deliver impact and really like, up level the operations of different organizations and work with them to do that. But getting really focused and making sure you're finding to add the most value, and also set yourself up for those next set of features. Because I sometimes say that to people too. They'll be like, well, can you build this feature and this feature and this feature? I'm like, those are already on our roadmap. Like we want to do that at some point. Yeah. But if I build it right now, it's going to be a bad solution because we don't have a good foundation in place. Like if we're building like library support and we don't have good rendering, it's not going to be a good feature,
Sure.
So what that order of operations is, even though we want to build the whole world of solution, today, obviously,
of course, as quick as I can. But like you said, it's about, again, speed is great. And like you said, it is about speed. We know that because time kills everything, right? But quality. I mean, you have to be, if you're going to present something, especially a new launch, right? It has to be up to those standards that you set yourself to be yourself. And I think that is really good. It's like myself, even as a recruiter, it's like you have a huge influx of job requisitions because of how busy the market is. And sometimes when we have a particular lane as recruiters, we have a niche ourselves. And we are subject matter experts for what we recruit. And that's why we're good at what we do. We pay attention so we know how to vet somebody out and qualify them and quantify them. We know what to talk about to a hiring manager. But there's those moments where you want to go out of your lane and say, well, I probably can hire for this too. I can get but you shouldn't. Could you? Yes, but it would take more time and more research. And, that's what you're talking about is I want to, this is what we do best. We're trying to build this. Could we do this? Yes. Would it be as good as it needs to be or we want it to be? No. And I think that's probably shows, your stability is the fact that you can say no or wait. I think that's the hardest part, and forgive me. I don't think, Matt and I talked about this. I mean, is there a current product to purchase? Is it you have a timeline for it? If not, kind of give me that idea of when people can really start to use, the capabilities on a kind of a consumer scale.
Yeah, totally. And we actually have people who use our product every day, and our engagement is awesome. So like for people, as I said, you want that multi-vendor solution, you want to support all that, but there are people who are like, hey, I'm a pure Rockwell house, or I'm a pure, or just use one or two vendors, which are ones, some of the vendors that we support, and so when we run into that situation and there's that good, product, customer fit, we see people like really, taking to the product. And, for a long time, I'd always say the product sells itself best, just get people in the product and them using it. And so, yeah, absolutely. For now, what we primarily had people on is like free trial period, because we also want to get the point where the product's mature enough that we don't start charging before, the product's ready, but we are switching that in the near future. But yes, we have like, I think we have around, I don't know, I probably shouldn't say the number, but we have a pretty large number of companies in the beta. We have an even larger number of companies on our wait list. So like our wait list grew from 50 companies to like close to 400 companies by the end of last year.
Fantastic.
We have this wait list here, but on the same time, people join the wait list and they demonstrate high enthusiasm and that sort of thing. That's kind of what gets us off the list, because obviously we want to work with people who are enthusiastic. So we have people we pulled out of that group that were like, are in our Slack channel now. We just look out and that sort of thing. So, like we're always happy to work with people. So like if someone's listening to this podcast, or they're listening to this and they want to try the product, like they should definitely go to Copia.io and just sign up, and they should even say that they listen on this podcast and they're excited about it. And I'm very happy to have the conversation. And we do talk to almost everyone who signs up for the wait list and wants to have a conversation, just because, as I said, the most important thing for us is to really understand the market.
Yeah. Keep your ear to the ground. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, as I mentioned, feedback's been really awesome from those conversations. We've seen really good engagement numbers too. So people even using the product, 2 to 3 hours a week, which for a source control solution is like pretty substantial. That's about the average usage. So, and, thousands of commits have gone through the product now, and it's pretty stable. So
that's amazing. Really
for us, it's, supporting additional vendors so we can approach a broader part of the market. And we're going through a redesign, just to really get that, best in class user experience, really simple
UI, all that stuff. Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure the more people use it, the more feedback you're going to get on what's working, what's not, like you said, or even what's most aesthetic for people to play with. And again, you're only going to get that from customer feedback. And, with the current customers you have, I'm sure, the original ones was a mix of you reaching out, maybe a little bit of word of mouth, but where do you think you're getting most your traction from with these, these waiting lists? They're obviously hearing it from something or seeing it somewhere. Is this an active campaign? Is it kind of word of mouth? It's a mix of both. How are you getting these customers wanting to try the product?
Yeah, it's definitely a mix of both. I would say up until we had about 150 or 200 people on the wait list, it was like entirely word of mouth and then some cold outreach. So it was definitely like, and oftentimes, the relationship is like a system integrator talks to an end user, that end user reaches out to us, or vice versa. So there's a lot of like proliferation of communication in the space. And then also just, LinkedIn, Reddit, different places where people talk about these things all the time. Actually, it's like surprising how often I bet
Reddit's a pretty good community for stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it comes up all the time, like what's good source control practices, how do you manage your files? And there's even like, is there Git for PLCs, which is really
right, which is crazy. Actually, there is.
Yeah, there is. And then we've done a couple of webinars and white papers. And so that brought in some traction as well, just from, us giving talks and people being curious about the product. And then, we've started to do a little bit of marketing. We're pretty early on that, but obviously you need to do that to get visibility. And then the other thing is like, we obviously want to bring DevOps to the space as a broad category. And it was already there a little bit, so I don't want to say we're the ones bringing it, but like we want to fan the flames of DevOps in the space, let's say, and also build out the sets of solutions that make it possible to have a complete DevOps solution in the space, right? So like for us, that's increasingly also where we're thinking about this sort of content we want to produce and that sort of thing is like, let's really talk about what DevOps might look like in industrials and how do we build consistency and process for change management in these environments.
Yes, I mean, I guess you said that. So really then that marketing plan is probably the next big scale that you're going to be able to, feed this into people's minds. But would you say that right now the most important thing is to continue to build, and revamp the product, then you can market? Or would you rather market first, get the name a little more out there, show a little bit and piece of the product is, and then, again, bring more of the funnel in? I mean, what do you think is the best way to do that for you?
I think it's like back to the startup thing, like you can't really plan.
Good answer.
So like from my perspective, it's like you have to do it all at once. And then like, we can onboard people right now in the product, and we onboard people every day into the product. So it's not like the product's not in a good state. So from our perspective, it's very much like, hey, like we'll market the product right now. We'll talk to people, we'll onboard them, we'll get them using it. We're going to charge when we feel like we have high conviction that we can start charging people, and we feel like it's a really healthy time to do so, because I don't want to charge someone and be like, hey, I just found this bug or something like that.
Right.
We're definitely in beta, / openish beta, but eventually we want to go into GA and then announce the company and really double down on the marketing effort and get our kind of story out there a little bit more. But in the interim, it's like, let's get the product to a point where we have internally really high conviction, and then get to the point where we're really really charging for it, in kind of a big way. But I expect that to be in the next month or so, so it's not like that far off from that piece,
So it's pretty simultaneous, but you have like the things you want from both ends. And I like that. You don't want to charge somebody too much for something that might have a bug in it. That's why it's kind of a soft launch, if you will, at the moment. But still, you're getting your feedback from it. In terms of the product, I keep calling it the product, and of course, it's Copia Automation. Is there a name that we can use for it, or?
Yeah, I mean, just Copia. That's like what we do. So yeah. So Copia. Nice. Yeah. So we don't have like a separate name for this product. Maybe someday. I was thinking like, control ops at some point or something.
Right.
I don't know. The funny thing is like, the name for source control is already source control. So, you have control in it. So you're like, what am I going to do?
Like, how am I going to shape this out? Something, catchy, but I think Copia is great. I mean, I think you said encompassing all kind of thing, I think it's probably the best way to put what you guys do. It's really what it's doing, something that, in the automation world, in terms of the software, really hasn't seen. I mean, again, when I think of automation, I think of course PLCs. I mean, one of the first things I think about. And again, HMIs. I also think about vision, being integrated, right, and traceability and RFIDs. But mostly, I think of what they're connected to. I think of it as mostly some type of hardware. I don't think of a lot of software when I think of automation. I think of industrial. I think of end-of-arm tooling. I think of cobots and mobile robots and conveyors and assembly lines, right?
Yeah.
So, like you said, it's almost normalizing the software in a bigger term within the industrial automation world, which I definitely think you guys are going to do with this. And this is kind of a nice question I read too. It says, who are the early employees, which we mentioned yourself and Matt, and then the ones that you're bringing in now, how did you hire them? Again, is it a campaign? Is it people you knew from before? Are you building excitement? Kind of explain the process of how you're drawing people to, buy into the future, right, of automation here.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few different ways. I mean, a lot of it, it's actually, sometimes kind of random. So sometimes it's through network. We've had a few hires through network. We've had people through AngelList, where you put jobs.
Okay.
But yeah, essentially a combination of like job postings and AngelList and network. So, we get a lot of people that way. The typical profile, someone we hire in who's like very excited about the company, is often someone with like some sort of hard engineering background who like switched into software over time. So we have someone who's formerly a chemical engineer, went and worked for a system integrator for a few years, switched to software over a decade ago. And for him, it was the coming back into this company. Or software engineers who've worked in like kind of adjacent companies. So we hired he was about to get promoted to principal engineer out of Altium. They do CAD software. We have a former staff engineer of National Instruments. So we've been able to pull together a really strong engineering team that's like, either people who had background in industrials at some point and then switched out, or were working on software in adjacent companies that were kind of building software or hardware for the space. Nice. And so that's a lot of things, a lot of where we hire. And then from out the sales and marketing side, it's very similar as well. People who've sold in the space before,
sure.
That sort of thing. So we managed to pull together a pretty good collection of people who have an interest in the space. And then we've seen a lot of excitement in the hiring process. Like, I always cite this, but we've extended 15 offers and 14 have been accepted. So we've actually had a very easy time hiring. And I think part of it is that like we are solving a real problem in a real industry. It's not like we're doing like, I don't want to, since this is public, I'm not going to
I know, don't worry about it.
Say anything negative about, but since no one ever understands what my company does, when I'm with my friends, I say I do AI for dog food. So we're not an AI for dog food company.
I like that.
Not that that's such a bad problem.
Right.
Not a problem that's compelling to the sort of people.
I'll buy in, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I
it sounds
love
like a good
that.
idea, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's amazing because, like you said, I mean, to have such a good success rate. I mean, part of, for some reason, I don't like the word startup sometimes. I understand it encompasses the full, new company type thing, but what you've been doing, you've been thinking about it for 2 years, and people are actually buying into this. So it's kind of hard to still call it a startup, but it's tough, I think, for sometimes people to trust and to have faith, right? And not want more stability. I mean, I think that if anything, what I've seen about engineers is they're very routine. They're very analytical. They want to know that this is a process and everything's going to work out if I plug this into here. And with a startup type role, not everything is guaranteed, like you said. Not even the timing of everything is guaranteed. So the fact that you've been able to quantify, qualify people, you've been able to get them excited, and then, like I said, 14 out of 15 people accept it. You must be doing something right. The story must be right. They must have faith in you. And faith in the rest of the staff that's already there. So I think that's pretty admirable and something you should tell more people. I think actually that's something you could actually put on LinkedIn. Really, I mean, not that you need help hiring, but it's just, that's a great stat to have because it's scary, right? It's a very scary thing for some people to enter into, kind of a process like that. That's a great metric to say for the future, I think.
Yeah, and I think the thing for engineers looking at this, actually got this feedback from our engineers like several months after you accepted an offer was you were the only company I interviewed with where you talked about the technology the whole time. You know what I mean? He's like,
I told you, I love technology. People are going places for the technology. Culture, yes. Money, sure. Technology, they love it.
Yeah. Well, if you're engineer for a decade or longer, you get bored, working on basic problems. And so when you're like, hey, I'm going to try and understand how to interface with 10 different vendor types of PLC, and I'm building out this platform, and I need to think holistically about all these different sorts of technology, it's an exciting problem for software engineers, to work on. And then especially people who have a background in the space who are like, I was thinking about this 10 years ago and then I left. And now that we're solving this problem, I want to come back, So
I love it. No, and I was thinking this too, break this down too for obviously most people are going to see this are going to be from this world. Let's admit it. I mean, some more mechanical, some less, software inclined or programming inclined. But if you were going to say to in layman's terms, like you mentioned your friends and the dog food AI, right? Yeah. If you're going to say in layman's terms what this is going to do, what pain it's going to solve, in an easy couple of sentences, what would you say that is? What's the tagline here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's funny because it's like someone asked me a related question not too long ago, which they asked me what does success look like for you?
Sure.
And I oftentimes hear this from people where they'll be like, well, and they'll just assume success for me as some monetary outcome working on this.
Some amount of money, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, actually, I was kind of making pretty good money as a software engineer.
I would assume so.
I was doing pretty well. You know what I mean? And I didn't have to work as hard as I do now. So I'm like, if I really cared about money, it would have been a little bit of a different outcome in terms of what I wanted to do. And I was working on cloud computing, that sort of thing. I once had a VC ask me, she was like, why didn't you just, work on a microservices cloud computing startup? And I was like, well, it seemed really boring to me. So the reason that I want to work on this company was, because every day it's a problem that is compelling to me, and that I want to work on the actual technology involved, because I also think the impact of the technology is really going to be huge. And to me, what I look at when I look at the space overall is you see that efficiency in manufacturing, industrials, and that sort of thing has started to flatten out over the last decade, especially in North America, but also globally. So when you start looking at that sort of thing, you're like, hey, well, it's really interesting. Can we build a technology that enables the next generation of solutions in the space, right? And so for me, that's kind of what I view as we're actually building infrastructure. So when you start talking about digital transformation and redoing all of your lines and building all this stuff, you're like, well, how do you actually make those changes? And you get into the meat of it, and you're like, well, it's actually really hard to make a change right now. It's really risky, and you don't know who's making changes, and there's lots of other things happening, So you're like, can I actually kind of deliver this as kind of a core infrastructure, core platform component that makes it possible for people to build that next generation of solution? and really up-level efficiency in the manufacturing space and up-level our ability to ship really good solutions in this space. And that's what's exciting to me, is the idea of like, well, what does this space become? So, we work with a company and they're like, hey, we want to build reusable code components for all of our different sites so we can deploy changes globally. And it's like, you can't build that right now, With like our sort of solution, you can start to approach that sort of problem, and that, what does that actually enable? That's really exciting to me. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but to me, that's like at least what success looks like for us, and like what I'd like the company to accomplish is to hopefully enable, a new generation of innovation in this space, and a new generation of kind of automation and manufacturing.
It's the big picture. Definitely the big picture.
Yeah,
I completely agree with that too. No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, you encompass your passion along with the company's drive.
Yeah,
and it seems like a lot of people are buying into this from a consumer side and from the employee side. I mean, I'm excited. I'm excited to meet you guys, excited to see where you guys go. Because again, learn about this from Matt and learn about this from you. When I first saw Copia Automation, I read the tagline and read what you guys wrote there. I was like, I got to figure out what these guys are doing here. I got to figure this out because it seems so much more software based than I'm used to. And then he kind of filled me in. I was like, oh, great. I want to talk to him again. I got to get you on the podcast. And then, of course, this conversation. To learn how you started, what you really, trying to alleviate, but also the people you contact to begin with to really nail down, how you can take this into the future. Not now, but really into the future. You're trying to enable something for the future. That's what you're doing and make it easier than it's ever been before. And I think that's compelling. And I think people are going to be very, very interested to learn more. So one more time, if people, of course, are interested in, learning a little bit more about Copia, maybe even learn more about yourself, what the capabilities are, what it can do for them, or even just, interested in the technology itself, where do they go? What are the main addresses they can go visit to learn those things?
I mean, the best way to do it right now is at copia.io. That's our website. So just copia.io, you can input, output, so copia.io. And then you can go and sign on the form there. And if you mention the podcast, we'll respond, right away. So definitely say that, we heard you talk about this. We're excited to have a conversation. We're always excited to chat as well. And, that site form goes directly in Matt and my email. So it's not like you're going into some bucket. It's like I get an email or, when you sign up there. So it's a really easy way to contact us. And I think our SLA on responding to that is like, roughly 2 hours. So it's like we almost always talk to you pretty quickly. And then from there, we can talk about if you want to try the tool, what that would look like and how we can do a structured trial to make sure that we get the most value out of our time, or alternatively, just we can sit down and jam and, we can onboard you in a month or whatever. So we're always happy to talk to people. And, for us, it's always valuable to like really understand what's happening in the space. And, one of our cultural values is really low ego. I would say we're very low ego and we try to be very empirical. So, for me, I'd rather hear it from someone that they want something or they think something is dumb or it's a bad idea than have it come out in the metrics later. So, definitely, we're very open. I would say I can take a punch. I might be bruised, for the next couple of days, but I can take a punch, So we're very open to people saying, what works for them, what doesn't, and what they're looking for. And, my final note on that is, I was a software engineer for, many, many years. So for me, it's like, I know, once you're building a solution, someone coming in and telling you how to do your job is not great. So, from our perspective, it's just like we're trying to build tools to enable people to do better work and be able to work more efficiently, enjoy their lives more, So from our perspective, it's like, people should just let us know what they want and to chat with us and we're have conversations.
I love it. I mean, like you said, it's your product is only good as what it does for the individual. It's as simple as that. So the more examples they can bring to the table, the more things you can fix for people. Is there anything else, any final comments you want to add? I mean, I think we have a ton of content in here that people are going to love again to hear, learn about too. Any kind of final comments you want to add to the podcast here before we let the people get on with the rest of their lives here?
No, this was great. It's super fun chatting. It's always the final comments that get you into trouble. So I think
it's true. Yeah.
It's always I have one more thing. You're like,
well, actually, we'll save it for the emails back and forth. But no, I do. I appreciate your time. Again, I appreciate Matt's before, but really appreciate your time is that I'm going to say it again, the CEO and founder of Copia Automation, no matter how awkward that might sound to you. Congratulations, on it's obviously going on 2 years of hard work, of passion, blood, sweat, and tears. And I think it's very exciting what is going to come of this in the future, what it can do for automation, what it can do for people, I think is what that's going to come down to, because automation is one thing, but automation also puts food on tables. It distributes things. It gets things done. That's what the impact really is going to be in terms of this product and what it can do. So I want to thank you again. Wish you guys the best. We'll stay in touch. Again, visit the website, check them out, talk to them. If you could use this software, by all means, strike up a conversation and say you saw it here, and maybe they'll give you a discount. I don't know. Don't quote me on it, but you never know what might happen. But thank you, everyone. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
I'm making a move. Study long, study wrong. Ain't nothing gonna happen on its own. I'm making a move. Don't need no hinges for this song. I got joy all through my soul. I'm making a move. Get up, get out. Mr. Sun is shining on me.